So today, what are we looking at? We're looking at Republic Book 4. You guys started out with Republic Book 1, where we had these conversations between Socrates and Thrasymachus and a few other people, and we talked about what justice was. We're going to look at what justice is according to Socrates and Plato now. And it's very different than what we saw in Book 1. In Book 1, justice was, paying people back. Paying good people back good things, paying bad people back bad things. There's actually a movie out there called Payback, Mel Gibson, where the whole point of the movie is bad people get bad things, and that's the right thing to do. That wasn't going to work, we saw why. Then Thrasymachus comes out with this might makes right kind of philosophy. Whoever's in power gets to decide and impose their views on everybody else, and that's the right way for things to go. And we saw some problems with that, too. So Socrates was just pointing out other people's problems, wasn't he? It's not really fair for him not to supply us with some sort of positive idea of what justice is. This is where he does it. Before we get to that, though, we got to ask about the soul, and parts of the soul. And I think part of what we ought to think about here is, not just taking things at face value. Okay, he talks about parts of the soul and the city and all these things. Why is he doing that? Why do we have to talk about the soul if we want to know about justice? I mean, first of all, you're talking about the soul. They couldn't see a soul any more back in Greek times as ancient Greek times. There's still Greek people around, right? They couldn't see the soul any more back then as we can now. There's a lot of people who think that talking about the soul is just a bunch of nonsense, right? If I took a poll of you right now, and you don't have to defend your position or anything like that, and I'm not going to tell you where I come down on this because I don't want to skew the poll, but everybody has to vote. How many of you believe that there's no such thing as a soul, all you've got is your body, and that's you? And when your body dies, it's over. A few, okay. How many of you believe that you have some sort of soul, and that's going to last for all eternity? Okay. How many of you think of that soul as something sort of like what we see in movies, where somebody gets hit, and they're dead, and then you see this kind of like ghostly form come out and walk around, and you can see through it, and they look at their body and they say, holy, whatever, I'm dead. Nobody has that sort of notion? Well, that's pretty good. Cartoons use that too. Why? Because it's so difficult to represent the soul. This is the question of what makes you you. If you're uncomfortable with the idea of the soul, because of all sorts of theological overtones, think about your personality. What makes you you? What gives you the characteristics that you have of being the kind of person that you are, for better or for worse? Probably some parts better and some parts worse. Right? Nobody's perfect, and nobody's perfectly terrible. So why do we have to worry about this in order to know what justice is? Well, think about personalities. Are some people, with their personalities, are some people more reliable than others? Yes or no? Yeah, and that's part of their personality, right? That's not just something that they happen to be one day and it changes completely to the next. As a matter of fact, if it does change, we say something has happened. Something has really affected them. What else? What are some other aspects of our personality that might have to do with whether somebody is doing the right thing or wrong thing? Well, yeah.
Their conscience.
Do they have a sense of conscience? Yeah, because most of us have that sense of conscience. Do all of us follow it? No, I don't all the time myself. Some people do follow it all the time. Some people don't actually have that little voice of conscience. We call those sociopaths. And they are extremely dangerous because they are only interested in satisfying their own desires, and everybody else is just there to satisfy their desires, and if you get in their way, they have no compunction about doing anything whatsoever to you. And they're actually not treatable. There's no way to fix them psychologically because they don't care what other people actually think. They can't sense that. Most of us do have a conscience. I'm going to presume everybody in here does, so you're all familiar with that experience. Whether you follow it or not, that's part of what determines whether you're going to be just or not. That's part of your personality. That's part of your soul. What are the sort of things that drive people to do bad things? Let's take injustice. Let's not take justice. Think about your own experience or about movies you've seen or shows, because you've all seen hundreds of thousands of hours, maybe tens of thousands of hours of shows in which people do bad things to each other. Think about reality shows, yeah.
Pressure.
Pressure, okay. What kind of pressures?
Maybe like peer pressure or just like pressure within yourself to do something because you don't feel like, you're good enough until you do it.
Okay, those are two good examples of things that move people to do things. Maybe sometimes for good, maybe sometimes for bad. Peer pressure is stemming from a desire to be liked by other people, right? Which is a natural part of your makeup as a human being. You have a desire to be liked. Every one of us does. It can steer us in good ways, it can steer us in bad ways. And then you talked about something else that's interesting. Instead of just worrying about what other people think, you worry about what you think about yourself, right? Maybe you feel guilty if you don't measure up to some standards that you've imposed on yourself. Like I do that when I have a to-do list, and every day I don't get my to-do list done. Now, the rational thing would be to put less stuff on my to-do list, wouldn't it? But I don't do that yet. I keep putting all that stuff on there, and I get about half of it done, and then I feel, instead of feeling good about the stuff that I actually do get done, I tend to feel bad about the stuff I don't get done. And then, okay, that's a psychological fact. How might that affect my life? Well, maybe I get short with my fiance because I'm feeling pressure, right? Or maybe I decide I'm not going to do something with somebody because I have to get this stuff done, right? And maybe I should take it easy more often. Maybe that would be a good thing for me to do. Maybe I would be a better person if I did that sort of thing. What else drives us to do bad things?
Temptation.
Sensation. What do you mean by that? That's
Like, I don't know, sometimes let's say with food.
okay, very good.
A chocolate maybe that you know that you cannot eat that, and then like it's tentative and you eat it.
Yeah. We have desires for all sorts of things, and they're objects of sense. And why do we involve ourselves with them? Because it feels good. Chocolate tastes good. Coffee tastes good once you get used to it. When you're a kid, beer doesn't taste good, but then you get older and beer does taste good, if you have a taste for beer. If not beer, probably wine. If not wine, probably something else, right? We even make special drinks for people who don't like those, spritzers and things like that. All different kinds of foods attract us. Yeah? Oh, okay. What else? What are other pleasures that drive us?
Money.
Money, yeah. And money is a little bit different, right? That's
Money
not a
drives
physical.
everything.
Well, that's not a physical pleasure, though. I mean, you can take out a dollar bill and you could look at it and you could say, wow, that's great art, great workmanship. And I suppose you could that feels nice, right? Or, oh, it smells so good. You can't eat it. And you can try, but What else? So sight, sound, feel. You could crinkle it. Is that a particularly nice sound? I'd rather listen to music myself. So money by itself doesn't actually provide much pleasure. Maybe, gold coins do because they're pretty.
Well, it gives you stuff that can provide pleasure.
Okay, very good. Yeah, money is a go-between. Money is a means to get you all sorts of other things. And there's lots of possessions that we have. We have desire for money. We don't desire, if we're not crazy, we don't desire money just for its own sake. We desire it because of the good things we think it's going to give us. Right? You could just go on, down the list. All the things that people are willing to, say, lie for, cheat for, steal for, hurt other people for. There are people who will hurt each other in order to get clothing. Right? There are people, once you get into talking about sex, there's all sorts of ways in which people screw up their lives, isn't there? We have a whole industry that sort of caters to that. And I'm not just talking about the porn industry, I'm talking about like advertising. They realize that sexuality and the desires of having sex or thinking about having sex or imagining sex are so powerful that they can just suggest something, connect it to some product that's not connected to sex whatsoever, except in a purely accidental way, and you can sell it. Right? Think about beer commercials. There's some beer commercials where it's a bunch of guys out camping and they're having a great time around the campfire. But how do most beer commercials tend to go? Your experience?
The hot girls.
Yeah, exactly. Why do they do that?
Because the guys will see a commercial and see a bunch of hot girls and then want to go buy some beers.
Yeah, and now think about this for a minute. Rationally, all of you have watched beer commercials. You've all seen probably thousands of them. Did you ever think to yourself, this sort of line of reasoning, did you say, and if you're a woman, think about this in terms of men, and you could think of other products, right? In this commercial, buying this beer gets these guys, who are kind of average looking, a whole bunch of hot girls to hang around with. And they're probably going to, they seem to be very friendly with these girls. And these girls seem to be very friendly with them. I'm willing to bet there's a good chance that they're going to get to have sex with them. So if that works for them, it must be likely to work for me if I don't screw it up in some way. So I should probably drink Coors or Bud or pick whatever you want. Does anybody actually sit there and reason out this way when they're watching that? I don't know anybody who does. And we actually make fun of it. We'll be like, that's not gonna influence me. That's stupid. But it does work, doesn't it? So it must be hitting us on some sort of level that's bypassing reason. It must be appealing to some other part of our personality or soul in a way that gets us to do things. Because, there's a reason why advertisers use sex to sell things, because it actually does work effectively. Why exactly it works, that's a different question. Let's think about how Plato deals with this. Now, I'm actually not going to talk that much about the city, because this reading has to do with the city and how the soul is like a city and all that sort of stuff, and the guardians and the lesser guardians and the tradespeople. Let's just stick with the parts of the soul. What do we know that we have? We have feelings, right? Every one of you has feelings? A whole bunch of them probably, right? And you have desires. And you have some desires that Plato calls appetites. If you didn't, you'd die. There was a really interesting case I heard about one time on NPR in one of these kind of shows where they explore these things in great detail, about a man whose body quit producing testosterone. And this just goes to show you how that the physical does actually matter quite a bit. Testosterone, all of you produce it. If you didn't, you'd be really screwed up. Who produces more testosterone? Men tend to, right? Because that's part of what makes us mannish. If you want to, like, change your gender or something like that, and you're a woman, you want to up your testosterone. If you want to, I suppose you want to lower it if you're trying to change as a guy. All of us have testosterone, and testosterone is linked to desire, not just sexual desire, but desire in general. Think about all the different things that we desire. We went through a few of them. Things that we eat, things that we taste. We desire those. I'm actually on the way home tonight. I was considering buying one of those deli pizzas. Taking that home because I've got a lot of work to do and I don't feel like cooking dinner. And those taste really good. And I can almost, if I imagine it to myself, I can almost imagine what that's going to taste like. Instead, I'm going to get Chinese because my fiance is not feeling well, and hot sour soup makes her feel better. And I like hot sour soup too. How many of you like hot sour soup? None of you like hot sour soup? It's all good, especially on cold days, And I can imagine that, right? I can begin to desire it. Why do I desire that sort of thing? Well, it's what's going on in my soul, but also partly what's going on in my body. If you don't have any testosterone, you quit desiring things altogether. This guy, there was something wrong with his body, his glands. He stopped producing it, and he would just lay in bed all day long. And this is going to kind of gross you out, but for his meals, he was perfectly happy eating like Wonder Bread with some mayonnaise on it. And that was great. He didn't feel like there was anything wrong. Luckily, he had a girlfriend, and she was like, "What's going on with you?" And he said that his experience, he had no attachments to anything else, and he would walk around, and his sense of looking at everything was, "That's beautiful, that's beautiful, that's beautiful." But there was no actual appreciation of the beauty of things. As soon as we start to have desires, they start to draw us towards things. Things that we consider beautiful or attractive or desirable or enjoyable or pleasurable, or pick whatever you want. Even some things that are painful can become pleasurable too, right? They can become something that somebody needs. Think about runners or other people who like to work out a lot. After a while, they come to crave that stimulation. Their body needs it. Plato would say their soul needs it. You have all sorts of appetites that you could think of. Why don't you just follow them all the time? I mean, if you did, you wouldn't be in this classroom. You'd be out there eating or sleeping or having sex or running or who knows what. Playing with a dog. Basking in the sun. There's no sun today, but that's a pleasurable thing. So what else has to be in the soul in order for you to wind up being here? Why aren't you just out there having fun? Okay, for a few of you, doing philosophy is fun, and this is your idea of a good time. But there are many more pleasurable things than this, right? We talked about conscience earlier, right? Conscience opposes often what our desires or appetites tell us. Plato's not going to talk about conscience so much. He's going to talk about reason. What got you here is that you think it's better for you to be here than not to be here, right? Why do you think that?
so we don't get behind on our work.
Okay. Now that's a pretty, high level, high order way of thinking, because it involves all sorts of other concepts too, doesn't it? Getting behind in your work. What's wrong with getting behind in your work?
Get bad grades, you're out of school, it goes on.
Okay, you get out of school, maybe that would be a good thing. I mean, if you get out of school, then you can hang around the house and just, drink beer and play Nintendo all day. Or whatever, the current PlayStation is. Sort of dating myself. I mean, why not do that? Well, you reason out that that's not what's ultimately good for you. Why don't you want to drop? Why don't any of you want to drop out of school besides the fact that your mom and dad will get mad? Yeah.
Because you think about the future, what's better for yourself.
Exactly. You put off having some pleasure now because you're thinking that it's going to be better for you down the line, right? And there's some pleasures, I mean, that's deferment of gratification, as we call it. There's some pleasures that you may be attracted to, but a part of yourself says, whoa, what's wrong with me? I shouldn't be desiring that, right? Everybody's had something like that in their lifetime. Everybody's had something where they said to themselves, that's not a good thing for me to want that much, or want this way, or want in this form. What did that for you? That was reason. Good thing you've got it, isn't it? Is that all there is to your soul? What does Plato say in what you guys read? Is there another part? Some psychologists would say no. Aristotle, we're going to look at in the coming weeks, he's going to say you have a rational part and a appetitive or emotional or desirous part. What does Plato say? What's in your soul?
Virtues.
Well, we're going to get to the virtues. Well, this could be a good way to do it. What are the virtues that he actually talked about in Book 4? Justice, right? But what else? There were some other virtues. Yeah.
Wisdom, courage, and temperance.
Okay, very good. And wisdom is going to have to do with our rational part. Temperance is going to have to do with that. Courage, where does that fit in? Are you courageous with your rational part, with your reason? Is your reason sort of like a cop standing up to the evildoer? Or is your reason for Plato more like the wise person sitting there and saying, really you shouldn't do this? In his city there are two different sets of people, aren't they? You've got the rulers, and the rulers aren't the enforcers. Nor do the rulers protect the city from outside threats. You have, according to Plato, you have a part of yourself that protects you from outside threats and can also react against your desires and appetites. He calls this the passionate or the spirited part of the soul. I'm going to change this to rational part, spirited part, and appetitive part. And these are all you. How many of you get angry? Everybody should raise their hand, because all of you do get angry, right? You're telling me you don't get angry, you're making stuff up, because everybody gets angry. We can stifle it, we can pretend we didn't get angry, but we all do get angry. Can you ever be angry with yourself? How many of you have been angry with yourself? Why? Is it like getting mad at yourself? Yeah.
I guess you're frustrated, you maybe thought you made the wrong decision, or you could have done something better.
Mm-hmm. You made the wrong decision, or you could have done something better. And why didn't you? Well, you followed some desire. If you get mad at yourself for being overweight, like I am. It's because you followed your desire to eat more than you should. Not just once, not just twice, but over and over and over again. Right? If you get mad at yourself for giving in to temptation to, well, let's say we take a sort of common relationship thing. All of you know somebody who's been in a relationship, a sexual relationship with somebody who's bad news for them, right? Maybe the sex is good, but the relationship itself is bad. They're abusive. They exploit them. They're sponging money off of them, things like that. And they say, I'm going to break up with them. But then they don't stick to it. If they don't stick to it, it's because of their desires, right? It's not because reason told them to do that, because reason is the part saying, break up with them. If they get angry at themselves because of that, it's that spirited part. That's the part with which you actually do get angry. When you get angry at other people, why do you get angry at other people? What's going on there? Yeah.
They could have disappointed you, or they didn't act the way you wanted them to act.
Okay. They frustrated you. They disappointed you. Do you get angry at people when you feel that what they did was okay? No. You feel that they violated some norm. They let you down when they shouldn't have let you down. They treated you in a way that you didn't like because you're not deserving of that. That's the spirited part. That's defending you from outside threats. It's sort of like the soldiers that have to get, worked up when they go into battle. Remember, at the time that these guys are thinking about this, you actually had to run a sword through somebody or a spear through somebody. So you had to be, you couldn't just push a button, or something like that. You had to be pretty excited. And cops and firefighters and people like that still have to do things along those lines. They have to get themselves into the moment in order to do what they need to do to protect people, to protect the self, to protect the city. So you have these three parts to your soul, and these correspond to virtues, like you were saying. So Plato talks about wisdom, and he talks about courage, and he talks about moderation. And he doesn't tell you that much about wisdom in this book. But what does wisdom mean? It means not just knowing what the right thing to do is or what's good for you. It's being able to think it out. Right? Because is it enough for you to know a bunch of rules or a bunch of ideas? You will actually have to think them out over the course of your life, and it's always difficult to figure out which one to apply at which point. But if you actually are able to give yourself good counsel, then you have wisdom. Does everybody have that? No, not everybody. And it has to develop over time. These virtues, we talked about this a little bit last class, they're not produced in one day. They're not produced just by taking a pill. They're not produced by signing up for a program. They have to be produced by practice, by doing it over and over again until it becomes part of your nature, till it becomes worn into your soul, it becomes part of your personality or your character. So if you're an impulsive person and you'd like it to be different and you'd like to think about things before you get into them, you have to practice that. You have to make that a habit. Which means you probably have to break an old habit too, don't you? What does he tell us about courage? He does tell us something interesting about courage. What do you think courage is? What does courage feel like to you? Yeah.
The ability to face your fears.
Yeah, and that's a pretty common definition of courage. Face your fears. What does it mean to face your fears?
To overcome something you're uncomfortable with.
Okay, to overcome something you're uncomfortable with. How do you do that? Do you do that just like in your armchair at home?
No, you gotta step outside of your comfort zone.
Okay. These are all common ways in which we talk about it in our society. Stepping outside of your comfort zone, which generally means you're either stuck in a situation or you put yourself into a situation. If you have fears of snakes, you can watch the Discovery Channel all you like, but that's probably not going to help you face your fears. What do you have to do? Yeah.
I guess actually get out there and go see a snake.
Yeah, it might have to be by processes. You know, it might be the snake is across the room from you, and that's okay. And you do feel fear, but you face up to it, right? And then eventually it's going to culminate in you handling the snake, you know? And that you're not going to do that right at the start. Think about war, right? Think about basic training or boot camp for Marines. What do we do to soldiers and Marines and, to a lesser extent, people in the Navy and the Air Force, Coast Guard? We break them down, and we spend a lot of time scaring the hell out of them. And making them do things that are very physically arduous and yelling at them. And we get them to be able to go out onto a battlefield where people are going to shoot at them. That's a crazy thing to do, isn't it? Or is it a courageous thing to do? Everybody should be afraid of getting shot, right? What is courage for Plato? It's more than just facing up to the feeling of fear. It's developing a kind of understanding, he says, of the opinion respecting things to be feared. Courage is a kind of salvation, he says. Salvation, not in the eschatological, I'm being saved, I'm going to heaven kind of sense, but a keeping something safe, like preserving something. Like for instance, I save this by putting it in the closet and not just throwing it into the back of my car and keeping moths from eating it. We save things by putting them in the refrigerator. You can also save things in your soul. And what are you saving if you're courageous? The opinion respecting things to be feared. What is actually to be feared? When you face up to your fears, part of what you're doing is you're learning that the things that you are afraid of, that you think are going to kill you or destroy you, aren't really that terrifying. Again, with the soldiers in basic training, why do they go through all these drills? Why do they, for instance, I think they still probably do this, why do they gas them? That was a terrible part of basic training. You go into a gas chamber full of tear gas, and you have a gas mask on. What is it teaching you? Your gas mask works. You put it on right. And then they tell you, all right, take your mask off. And you have to do it. That's part of getting through basic training. And your lungs start filling up with this crap that makes you feel terrible, and your eyes start tearing, and your nose starts running, and you might puke, or all sorts of other things start happening to you. Why do they do that? Well, to teach you that it's not really that bad. Because it isn't actually that bad. Compared to some of the things that could happen to you, it's really not that bad. So if you see a cloud of that sort of thing coming at you, and it's not nerve gas, which will do horrible things to you, you can take it. That's part of what courage is knowing what you can take. It's knowing about things that are scary. And because you know about them, being able to stand up to them. If you know that, let's think about bullying, right? Big common topic these days. If you know that if you stand up to a bully, what are they most likely going to do? There's a difference between, say, like a bully and a thug. A thug, if you stand up to them, you're in trouble. They'll stomp you. But most of the people who mess with you aren't really thugs. They're bullies. What happens if you actually stand up to a bully? You've all seen this, right? At least once or twice. What happens when some kid has had enough and then tells the bully off or pops him?
They back off.
They back off, and usually they stay backed off, don't they? If you know that about human nature, isn't it a lot easier the next time around to confront a bully? was saying that courage is not just a disposition, a habit, it's also a kind of knowledge. And it's a knowledge that doesn't pertain so much to the intellect or reason, but to the spirited part. It's something that you would, in some sense, feel rather than be able to articulate explicitly. What's moderation? This also gets called temperance or self-control. Well, again, think about all those pleasures, all those things that draw us that we talked about earlier. Food, drink, sex, sleep, pleasures of the eyes. Some people get attracted to wealth, or think about the things people collect and they get obsessed about. Some of them I have a hard time understanding myself, like stamp collecting. No offense to anybody here if you're a stamp collector. I don't see what people get out of it. Your desires, do they have any limits to them by themselves? No. If you were given the opportunity, there's a pleasure center in your brain, and some drugs hit it just like that. And that's why people take drugs, because it feels so good. And then afterwards, when you don't have the drug, it feels so terrible. There's a thought experiment. Let's say that you could have an implant put into your brain that would stimulate that pleasure center constantly. So imagine the best feeling that you've had in your life so far. Whatever it happens to be. Now imagine that the rest of your life. You don't have to work, you don't have to do anything, you don't have to go back to school. You can just have this chip put back there or an electrode put back there and they can stimulate it constantly. How many of you would pick that life? It'd be tempting, wouldn't it? What would hold you back from it is this stuff. It's not your appetites. Because your appetites would be saying, oh yeah, I want that. Because that's all they know. Right? That's not the better part of you. It is something that's important because if you don't have appetites, you won't drink, you won't eat, you'll die. But how much food do you actually need? Do you need enough to get big? Every one of you in here is thinner than I am, which wasn't the case where I taught before. Interesting. There are certain limits, right? Do you need the food that you eat to be very rich all the time? Is that good for you? Why not? Yeah.
Well, usually the richer the food, the more sugar there is in it, I guess, and
Sugar and one other thing. What makes food taste good?
fat.
Fat, yeah. And actually, you do need some fat in your diet. If you go to the other extreme, you're probably screwing yourself up because your brain needs fat to work, and other parts of your body need fat too. But there are certain limits, aren't there? There's a not enough and there's a too much. It's sort of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. You all remember that story. You go in, moderation is like that. Not too much, not too little, not too hot, not too cold. You can think about this with an enjoyment like watching television. How many of you watch TV or you watch TV shows through something like Hulu or Netflix or through your console or something like that, or you watch movies or you watch web shows? All of you watch something? How many hours do you think you should watch? Is watching 6 hours a day a good amount, you think? Why not? Yeah.
Well, because basically you're just sitting around when you could be out getting active and
But it's pleasant, isn't it?
yeah, pleasant, but I mean it's not healthy.
Yeah. Now, your appetites don't tell you that. As a matter of fact, all of you know that temptation of you've just watched a show, and they always have something like about what's coming next. If you're using Hulu and you've got autoplay, you know exactly what's coming next episode. Are you going to sit there and watch the next show or not? Sometimes you'll sit there and you've got the remote and you channel surf. I'm just going to see if there's anything on. What's going on there? Your appetite is telling you, hey, this is good, this is fun, I enjoy this, let's do this, let's keep doing that. Reason, if it's working, would be telling you, no, you should maybe get up, go do something. And it works that way for every pleasure that you could think of. It works that way for sex, it works that way for conversation. Could you spend too much time reading? A lot of people enjoy reading, right? Can you spend too much time reading? Yeah. Even that can become something that is not moderate, something that's immoderate. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. The appetites by themselves can't figure out, this part of your soul can't figure out what those limits should be. Reason figures that out for you. Does reason make that happen? Do the appetites always listen to reason? No, they usually say, screw you. I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to steer the human being, every one of you, this way. In order for reason, which only just gives you advice, to make itself heard by the appetites, it needs that spirited part. It needs that force of will. And those two together can impose some order on the appetites. And if they do that long enough, how many of you have changed a habit in your lifetime? A bad habit? Any of you? What was it like? The first couple days of changing that habit, how did you feel? Tempted, and then how did that make you feel? Annoyed, exactly. Now we're starting to get really into it. When somebody quits smoking, for example, are they fun to be around? No. Not even if they have the Nicorette gum or the patch or anything like that, right? Because they want that thing. Their appetites are immoderate. How is it after a while, though? When you don't have these cravings, these temptations arising. What's it like then?
You start to get used to it and kind of stabilize.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. You start to get used to it. The appetites, if they're trained, they become moderate. They quit demanding so much. Likewise, if, the spirited part can go wrong too. Did any of you get angry at the wrong time, at the wrong people, too much? You stay angry too long? Yeah? Does that sound familiar? If you don't do it, somebody else does, that you know. That would be if the spirited part is not actually taking its direction from reason either. That's a problem too. The rational part by itself can sometimes end up getting sort of roped in just to try to figure out what the best thing to do for satisfying the aims of these. The spirited part, by the way, is also concerned with your self-respect, how you view yourself, how other people view you. And that can get a little bit out of hand too, can't it? If you need everybody in the world to respect you, how's that going to work? Is that going to happen?
No.
Yeah. If you demand that from everybody, and you use your reason just to try to figure out how can I get people to, think I'm a great guy, to look up to me, you're probably disordering things. The ideal order is that reason tells the spirited part, and the appetited part what to do. Not that these things impose their demands on reason. And when you have things arranged like that, then you actually have justice. A just person, somebody who does what's the right thing because they recognize that it's the right thing and they do so habitually and they do so for the right reason. They do so, Plato's saying, because their soul is properly integrated. If you find yourself being upset with yourself a lot, if you find yourself being sort of split against yourself, if you find yourself sometimes not, being able to stick to something because one part of your soul wants to go this way and the other part wants to go this way, then you probably don't have your soul completely integrated. You're not, you're not in good order. And that would be expected in this society, wouldn't it? Because there's all sorts of people out there and parts of our culture that are there precisely to screw you up. We talked about advertising. Is the advertising gonna put your soul in the right state? No, it's going to inflame your desires as much as possible because that's how we sell things. It's going to try to get you to not think about what the better thing is to do. One thing that you could ask yourself if you start to see things this way, what about your friends? The people that you surround yourself with? Are they steering you in the right way? Are they reinforcing you in seeing what's really good for you and then making yourself do it? Or are they facilitating you and doing things that you know aren't good for you? If you have a drinking buddy, they're probably not going to be somebody who's telling you, reason would say, because they're a drinking buddy. They exist only so that you can have fun, right? If you want to be well integrated, if you want to have a happy life, Plato would say, you have to have these things in harmony with each other. Because you have all of these. You have appetites. You have a spirited part of yourself. You have reason. So we could ask, is this actually true? I'm going to put that aside for the moment and just think about it. Let's say it is true. Let's say Plato's got it right. Then how many of you right now are unhappy with the way in which these things are arranged in your life? I know I am. Nobody else has ever felt like they're not completely integrated, like they sometimes do things and don't quite realize why they did them that way, or they get too angry, or they find themselves doing things that they know aren't good for them, and then afterwards end up saying, "God, that was dumb." I'm willing to bet that more than the people who raise their hands actually do. If that's the case, what would Plato say you ought to do? How would you go about fixing yourself? We have all sorts of ways to fix ourselves in this society. You can buy self-help books, watch Dr. Phil, go to the psychiatrist, take some antidepressants. If you have impulse control problems, there's a drug for that. Right? Plato would say you actually have to work on yourself. And Plato thinks that in the kind of society that we live in, you're likely to find yourself kind of screwed up. We don't live in an ideal society. What's good about that, though, is that there's a plan for how you might actually think about how to put yourself on the right track. Next class, we're going to look at another book of the Republic, and we're going to look at what we're doing in studying philosophy. It's got this allegory of the cave, so make sure to take a look at that. If you get a chance, look at some of those videos that I posted that actually show you the allegory of the cave being played out. You might get a kick out of some of those. When you're doing that, think about all this stuff. Bear this in mind. And I will see you on Monday. Have a good weekend. Not that that's going to happen every time. Yeah.
What's metaphysics? Because I saw that.
Okay. Metaphysics, that's a good question. And I'll tell you a funny story. So I'm in graduate school, and I'm taking one of my first classes in metaphysics, and I signed up for this. And the professor begins the class by saying, I'm not sure why all of you are in here, but I just want to make something really clear from the start. This won't have anything to do with crystals or past lives or any of that sort of stuff. People call that metaphysics, but this is a different kind of metaphysics. This is philosophy. That sort of stuff you can go down to the hippie fair and, do whatever you like. And, I actually, knew what metaphysics was at that point. But he had to say that because if you Google metaphysics, you will see all this stuff about crystals and tarot cards and all that come up. And there's a reason for that. Metaphysics in the philosophical sense means the study of ultimate reality, study of what lies behind the appearances. So thinking about what things are actually made of, right? What being is, what are the various types of being. It's very abstract, and it takes a lot to do. So now all these other things that people call metaphysics, they kind of are connected to metaphysics because they are based on assumptions about what is ultimately real. I mean, if you think that crystals are going to heal you in some way, it's probably because you think that crystals are attuned to the universe or that the human body reflects the universe or things like that. And those are metaphysical views. It's not philosophical metaphysics because it just assumes a certain thing to be true. It's not investigating it. It's just sort of assuming it and going from that point. Does that help?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of these
I know what you mean, but like the meaning of everything is still kind of abstract.
Yeah, a lot of these things, it takes quite a few examples to make them hit home. And this is where Plato, I think, is actually not a helpful person, in one respect. Because what does Plato always have Socrates say? Don't give me a bunch of examples. I want to know what the thing actually is. Well, how do we wrap our heads around things? Through examples, right? And if you actually look at Plato, how does Plato get his ideas across? He uses a lot of examples about medicine and carpentry and things like that. Okay, so let me stop that right there, and then we'll start with today's stuff. It's a good question.